Tractate Eruvin, General Introduction, Part 2. Partitions. The partitions that surround a private domain must be 10 tefachim high. They may be regular walls rising from ground level to a height of 10 tefachim. They may be the walls of a hole in the ground that is 10 tefachim deep, or they may be steep slopes that surround a mound that is 10 tefachim high. Any combination of these can also form a private domain. For example, a hole that is 5 tefachim deep and surrounded by walls 5 tefachim high is a private domain. A partition can be valid even if it is not entirely solid but has gaps. Obviously, every enclosed area must have at least one opening so that people can go in and out of it. Since this is a necessary feature of every enclosure, it follows that a partition is not necessarily disqualified because it has gaps. There is a difference in this regard between a gap that is an entrance and one that is a breach. An entrance does not disqualify a partition, but a breach does. Furthermore, not only does an entrance not disqualify a partition, but it itself is considered part of the partition. That is, the walls on either side are considered to extend across the opening and close it. Therefore, even the area directly opposite the entrance is also considered enclosed. A. Rules regarding openings. 1. A gap wider than 10 amos. To qualify as an entrance, a gap may not be wider than 10 amos. Any gap greater than 10 amos is a breach that invalidates the partition. 2. The gaps exceed the walled portions. Even if every gap in a partition is narrower than 10 amos, but the total width of all the gaps is more than the total width of all the solid parts, the partition is invalid. 3. Suras HaPesach. A Suras HaPesach, literally form of the doorway, is a structure that resembles a doorway. It consists of 2 vertical posts and a horizontal bar or string that extends from the top of one post to the top of the other, thus forming the shape of a doorway, which has 2 doorposts and a lintel. Because it looks like a doorway, it is more effective than the entrances discussed to this point. It is not considered a breach in the wall, even if it is wider than 10 amos. According to most opinions, even partitions made only of these structures are valid. A Tzuras HaPesach is widely used nowadays to enclose a carmelis, where carrying is rabbinically forbidden, and thereby convert it into a private domain where carrying is permitted. This is commonly called an eruv. B. Leniencies regarding partitions. The oral law handed down from Sinai teaches that a gap, even if it is not an entrance, does not disqualify a partition if it meets one of the following conditions. 1. Lavud. The rule of lavud, joined, tells us that any gap narrower than 3 tefachim is not considered a gap at all. Rather, it is viewed as solid all the way across. Thus, a partition may consist only of narrow sticks planted in the ground some distance from each other, provided that the gaps between adjacent sticks are less than 3 tefachim. Even though the partition is almost entirely open, it is valid, because each gap is considered as though it is closed. 2. Good. This leniency allows us to extend partitions into higher or lower areas that do not physically reach. This takes 2 forms. A. Good asik. Extend and raise the partition. A partition 10 tefachim high is viewed as extending upward, forming a partition for the area above. Thus, the space above a private domain is also a private domain, because the partitions extend upward and enclose it. B. Good achis. Extend and lower the partition. A partition 10 tefachim high that is raised from the ground, a fence around a balcony for example, can be viewed as extending downward, thereby converting the open area below it into a private domain. 3. P. Tikra. The edge of a roof extends downward and seals. As these words imply, the edge of a roof is considered to extend downward to the ground to form a partition. It thus renders the area beneath the roof a private domain. A sloped roof is not included in this leniency.